The HOA president shot my daughter at her wedding because she hated our black family. She didn't know I'm the Chief Justice. She thought she was powerful, but now she's going to prison forever. This is how I destroyed her life completely. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the garden as I watched my daughter Emma fix her veil in the mirror. 25 years old, radiant, and about to marry the love of her life. As Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, I had seen countless cases, made difficult decisions, and upheld the law for over 2 decades. But nothing in my distinguished career compared to the overwhelming pride I felt watching my little girl become a bride. "Dad, stop crying already," Emma laughed, adjusting my tie with gentle fingers. "You're supposed to be the strong one here. Mom's already gone through half a box of tissues." I wiped my eyes and smiled, remembering the day she was born 25 years ago. Even then she had been strong-willed and determined. As a toddler, she would stand up to kids twice her size if they were being mean to someone smaller. In high school, she organized protests against unfair school policies. In college, she studied social work because she wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. "Sorry, sweetheart. It's just hard to believe my baby is getting married. It feels like yesterday you were 6 years old, insisting on wearing your princess dress to the grocery store." Emma's eyes sparkled with tears. "And you let me, even though people stared. You always said I should be proud of who I am and never let anyone make me feel small." Our house in Maple Grove was perfect for the outdoor ceremony. We had moved here 15 years ago when I was first appointed to the state Supreme Court, and later when I became Chief Justice. Emma had always dreamed of getting married in our backyard under the old oak tree where she used to swing as a child. The white roses Sarah had planted were in full bloom, chairs were arranged in neat rows on the emerald lawn, and a beautiful wooden arch stood ready for the ceremony, decorated with ribbons and flowers that matched Emma's bouquet. The neighborhood had welcomed us initially. Most of our neighbors were professional families who appreciated having a respected judge living among them. We attended block parties, contributed to community projects, and Sarah had even served on the school board for several years. But there was one problem that had been growing like a cancer for months. Her name was Margaret Henderson, president of our homeowners association, and she was absolutely furious about our wedding plans. Margaret was a woman in her early 50s with sharp, angular features and an even sharper tongue. She had moved to Maple Grove about 5 years after us and had immediately begun inserting herself into neighborhood politics. Within 2 years she had gotten herself elected as HOA president, running on a platform of maintaining property values and community standards. What those code words really meant became clear over time. Margaret had a problem with anyone who didn't look like her or live exactly the way she thought they should. The trouble started 3 months ago when we submitted our application for the outdoor wedding event. All the paperwork was properly filed, fees paid, and we had personally visited every neighbor within 2 blocks to discuss our plans and invite them to attend. Margaret had shown up at our door the next evening, her face twisted with barely controlled anger. "Justice Williams," she had said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "I'm sure you understand that Maple Grove has certain standards to maintain. A large wedding with music, catering trucks, and guests until midnight simply isn't acceptable for a residential neighborhood." I had kept my voice calm and respectful as I always did when dealing with difficult people. "Mrs. Henderson, we've followed all the proper procedures. The event is well within city guidelines, we have all necessary permits, and we've notified all neighbors personally. The music will end at 10 p.m., and we've hired professional security to manage parking and noise." Her face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I don't care about your guidelines. I am the HOA president, and I say no loud parties in this neighborhood. People like you think you can do whatever you want just because of your position. This is a respectable community, not some inner-city party zone. People like you. Inner-city party zone." The racist undertones were unmistakable, but I had dealt with this kind of prejudice throughout my career. As one of only 3 black chief justices in the entire country, I had faced discrimination from lawyers, politicians, and citizens who couldn't see past the color of my skin to recognize my qualifications and achievements. But I never expected it in my own neighborhood, from a woman whose property taxes helped pay my salary. "Mrs. Henderson," I had replied carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is simply a wedding celebration for my daughter. We're not asking for anything that isn't allowed under community rules and city ordinances." But Margaret wasn't listening. She launched into a tirade about property values, neighborhood reputation, and how certain people always tried to push boundaries and change the character of established communities. Emma had been devastated when Margaret started her campaign against our wedding. The HOA president sent letters to every neighbor, warning them about the disruptive event we were planning. She called the police multiple times with noise complaints during our setup, even though we were working during normal daytime hours. She even tried to get the city to revoke our event permit, claiming we had provided false information on our application. "Dad, maybe we should just move the wedding to a hotel," Emma had suggested one evening after Margaret had confronted her at the mailbox, demanding to know why she couldn't get married somewhere more appropriate. "Absolutely not," I had replied firmly. "This is our home. This is where you grew up, where you took your first steps, where you learned to ride a bike. This is where your grandparents visited every Christmas. No one has the right to take this day away from you." But Margaret's harassment had taken a toll on Emma's excitement. She started having anxiety dreams about the wedding going wrong. She worried that guests wouldn't come because they were afraid of confrontation. She even suggested scaling back the celebration to avoid giving Margaret any reason to complain. I had spent 30 years fighting injustice in courtrooms across the country. I wasn't about to let a bigoted HOA president destroy my daughter's happiness. Now, as guests began arriving for the 2 p.m. ceremony, I tried to push thoughts of Margaret Henderson out of my mind. This was Emma's day and nothing would ruin it. My wife Sarah looked absolutely beautiful in her navy silk dress, greeting guests with the warm smile that had made me fall in love with her 30 years ago. She directed traffic with practiced ease, making sure elderly relatives had comfortable seats in the shade and helping parents corral excited children. Emma's future mother-in-law, Mrs. Chen, helped arrange the flowers and made sure the bridal party had everything they needed. David's family had embraced Emma completely, and his younger sister served as a bridesmaid alongside Emma's college roommates. The afternoon was perfect. A gentle breeze kept everyone comfortable, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled our backyard. Emma's college friends shared embarrassing stories about her dating life before David. My law school buddies congratulated me on raising such a remarkable daughter. Sarah's book club members raved about the decorations and the delicious appetizers. Then I saw her. Margaret Henderson stood at the very edge of our property line, arms crossed over her chest, wearing all black like she was attending a funeral instead of a wedding. Her face was set in hard lines of disapproval, and she stared at our celebration with undisguised hatred. Her husband Harold stood behind her, shifting uncomfortably and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Margaret had been watching our preparations all morning from her house directly across the street. She had positioned herself in her front yard, making notes on a clipboard and taking photographs with a long-lens camera. When the catering truck arrived, she had rushed over to check if it was properly licensed. When the musicians began setting up, she had called the police to complain about noise violations, even though they were only doing sound checks. "Ignore her, honey," Sarah whispered, taking my arm as she noticed my jaw clenching. "Today is about Emma and David. Don't let that woman steal any more of our joy." But I could see Margaret's presence was affecting our guests. Some people kept glancing nervously in her direction. The musicians looked uncomfortable, and even the minister asked me quietly if there might be any disruptions during the ceremony. The ceremony began at 2:30 sharp. Emma appeared at the back door of our house and every conversation stopped. She was absolutely breathtaking in her grandmother's vintage wedding dress, which Sarah had spent months altering to fit perfectly. The lace had been carefully preserved for 40 years, waiting for this moment. Emma walked down the aisle on my arm, radiant with happiness despite everything Margaret Henderson had put her through. Her fiancé David waited at the altar, tears of joy streaming down his face. David was a good man, a pediatric nurse who had met Emma when she was volunteering at the children's hospital. He was gentle, kind, and absolutely devoted to my daughter. The minister began the service with a prayer for love, commitment, and understanding. For a few precious minutes, everything was perfect. Emma and David exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to be patient with each other's flaws, and to build a family based on love and respect. That's when Margaret Henderson made her move. "This is a violation of community standards," she screamed from the property line, her voice cutting through the gentle afternoon air like a knife. "I'm calling the police right now. This illegal gathering ends today." A few guests turned to look, their faces showing confusion and concern. But the minister, bless him, continued the ceremony without missing a beat. Emma squeezed my hand and smiled bravely, whispering, "We expected this, Dad. Don't let her win." I was so proud of my daughter's courage. Even with Margaret Henderson screaming threats in the background, Emma kept her focus on David and their commitment to each other. But Margaret wasn't finished making a spectacle of herself. She stormed across the street to her house, her black dress flowing behind her like a dark cloud. Harold followed, trying to catch up and apparently trying to talk her out of whatever she was planning. 5 minutes later, Margaret returned. What I saw in her hands made my blood run cold and my heart stop beating for several terrifying seconds. Margaret Henderson was carrying a rifle. It was a hunting rifle, the kind used for deer hunting, and she was carrying it with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. The weapon looked enormous in her hands, black metal gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. "Everyone needs to leave now," she shouted, waving the weapon in the air above her head. "This illegal gathering ends today. I warned you people and you wouldn't listen." Panic rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Some guests ducked behind the white wooden chairs, others grabbed their children and started running toward the house. Mrs. Chin screamed and fell to her knees. The musicians dropped their instruments and dove for cover behind their equipment. The minister stopped speaking mid-sentence and stepped back from the altar, his face pale with terror. David instinctively moved in front of Emma, shielding her with his body. "Mrs. Henderson, put the gun down," I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Let's talk about this calmly. There's no need for weapons." But Margaret was beyond reason. Her face was twisted with rage and something else, a kind of manic satisfaction that she finally had everyone's attention. She kept the rifle pointed toward the ceremony area, sweeping it back and forth across the crowd. "I warned you people months ago," she screamed, her voice breaking with emotion. "I told you this neighborhood has standards. You think because you're some big-shot judge you can ignore the rules? You think you can bring your loud music and your crowds and ruin our peaceful community?" Harold appeared behind her, reaching for the gun. "Margaret, please put it down. You're scaring people. This has gone too far." She spun around and pointed the rifle at her own husband. "Don't you dare touch me. I'm tired of everyone in this neighborhood walking all over me. I'm tired of being ignored and disrespected." Emma and David stood frozen at the altar, still in their wedding poses but now surrounded by chaos and terror. I could see the fear in my daughter's eyes but also determination. Emma had inherited my stubborn streak, and she wasn't going to let this woman destroy her wedding day without a fight. "Please, Mrs. Henderson," Emma called out, her voice shaking but clear and brave. "This is just a wedding. We're celebrating love and family. We're not hurting anyone. Can't you please just let us have this one day?" That's when everything went horribly, tragically wrong. Margaret swung the rifle toward Emma, her finger moving to the trigger. The weapon was now pointed directly at my daughter's chest. "Shut up!" Margaret screamed, her face contorted with hatred. "You and your family are ruining this neighborhood. You don't belong here. None of you belong here." Time seemed to slow down like in a nightmare. I saw Margaret's finger tighten on the trigger. I saw Emma standing there in her white dress, beautiful and innocent and perfect. I saw my wife Sarah screaming my name from somewhere behind me. I saw David trying to push Emma out of the way. And then I heard the gunshot. The sound was deafening, echoing off the houses around us like thunder. Birds exploded from trees and car alarms started going off on the street. Emma crumpled to the ground, red spreading across the white fabric of her grandmother's precious dress like spilled wine. David dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his hands against the wound in her shoulder, his white shirt quickly soaking with blood. "Emma! Emma!" I ran toward my daughter, but Sarah reached her first, falling to her knees and cradling Emma's head in her lap. The yard erupted in complete chaos. Guests were screaming and running in all directions. Someone tackled Margaret and wrestled the gun away from her. I later learned it was David's father, a Vietnam veteran who had recognized the danger immediately. Harold Henderson was on his knees, sobbing and apologizing over and over. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Someone had called 911, probably multiple people. But all I could focus on was my little girl, lying on the ground in her wedding dress, blood soaking through the delicate lace that had been preserved for this special day. "Dad," she whispered as I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry the wedding is ruined. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger." Tears streamed down my face as I held her hand, feeling how cold and clammy her skin had become. "Don't you dare apologize, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. You were perfect and brave and beautiful." Emma tried to smile, but I could see the pain and shock in her eyes. "Am I going to die, Dad?" "No," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "No, you're not going to die. You're going to be fine. The doctors are going to take care of you, and you're going to have a beautiful life with David." But inside I was terrified. There was so much blood and Emma was getting paler by the minute. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and immediately took over Emma's care. They started in 4 applied pressure bandages and loaded her into an ambulance. Sarah and I rode with her to the hospital while David followed in his car, still wearing his blood-stained tuxedo. The emergency room became a blur of activity. Doctors and nurses rushed Emma into surgery while we filled out paperwork and answered questions. David's family arrived, along with my brother and Sarah's parents. We all sat in the waiting room, still wearing our wedding clothes, holding each other and praying. The next 8 hours were the longest of my life. Emma was in surgery, and the doctors couldn't tell us if there would be permanent damage to her shoulder and arm. The bullet had shattered bones, torn through muscles and damaged nerves. They warned us she might never regain full use of her right arm. Margaret Henderson had been arrested and charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and terroristic threatening. But as I sat in that hospital waiting room, staring at my hands and listening to my wife cry, I knew that wasn't nearly enough. My daughter's wedding day had been destroyed. Her body had been damaged. Her dreams of a perfect celebration in her childhood home had been shattered by hatred and bigotry. And Margaret Henderson had no idea that she had just made an enemy of the most powerful judge in the country. Emma survived the surgery, but the damage was extensive. The bullet had shattered her collarbone and damaged the nerves in her right arm. She would need months of physical therapy, and the doctors weren't sure if she would ever regain full mobility. David never left her side during the 2 weeks she spent in the hospital. He learned to help her eat, brush her teeth and get dressed. Their love had only grown stronger through the trauma. But Emma wasn't the same person who had laughed at my tears that morning. The bright, confident young woman who had stood up to bullies her entire life was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at sudden noises, had nightmares about gunshots, and couldn't bear to talk about having another wedding ceremony. "I just want to forget it ever happened, Dad," she told me one evening, staring out the hospital window at the parking lot below. "I want to pretend none of this is real. I want to go back to the way things were before." That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. Margaret Henderson's case came up for preliminary hearings 2 weeks after the shooting. Her lawyer, a public defender named Robert Mills, was trying to get the charges reduced to simple assault. He claimed Margaret had been defending her property and had only meant to fire a warning shot that accidentally struck Emma. What Margaret and her lawyer didn't know was that I had connections throughout the entire legal system. Judges who owed me favors from years of collaboration. Prosecutors who respected my opinion and valued my endorsement. Police officers who had worked with me on criminal justice reform initiatives. I started making phone calls. The first call was to District Attorney Patricia Morris, an old friend from law school who had worked her way up through the prosecutor's office over 20 years. "Patricia, I need to ask you a personal favor," I said, sitting in my home office surrounded by law books and family photos, including one of Emma at her high school graduation. "Anything, Robert? How is Emma doing? We've all been thinking about your family. She's alive, but she'll never be the same. The physical damage is bad enough, but the emotional trauma?" I took a deep breath. "Patricia, I need you to throw the full weight of your office behind this case. Margaret Henderson didn't fire a warning shot. She tried to murder my daughter on her wedding day because she couldn't stand the idea of a black family celebrating in her neighborhood." There was silence on the other end of the line. Patricia knew what I was asking. As Chief Justice, I rarely got involved in local criminal cases. My job was to oversee the appeals process, not influence prosecutions. But this was personal. "Consider it done," she said finally. "We'll make sure Henderson faces every possible charge. I'll put my best prosecutors on the case." The next call was to Judge Harrison Blake, who would be handling Henderson's case. "Harrison, I'm calling about the Henderson shooting case. Robert, you know I can't discuss pending cases with you. It would be inappropriate." "I'm not asking you to discuss it. I'm telling you that this woman shot an innocent girl at her own wedding because of racial prejudice and HOA power trips. The evidence is clear. The witnesses are solid. Don't let her lawyer manipulate the system to get her a slap on the wrist." Judge Blake was quiet for a long moment. He had been appointed to the bench with my recommendation, and he knew his career could be influenced by my opinion. "I understand your concern, Robert. Justice will be served according to the law." But my most important call was to Detective Maria Santos, who was investigating the case. "Detective Santos, this is Chief Justice Williams. I want to make sure you have all the resources you need for the Henderson investigation." "Yes, sir. We're building a strong case. We have multiple witnesses, video footage from security cameras and physical evidence. But there's something else you should know. What's that? We found evidence that Margaret Henderson has been harassing other minority families in the neighborhood for years. Threatening letters, false police reports, property damage that was never properly investigated. We're looking into potential hate crime charges. My hands clenched into fists. Margaret Henderson wasn't just a woman who had lost control in a moment of anger. She was a predator who had been terrorizing families like mine for years. Detective, I want you to interview every family she's harassed. Build a pattern of behavior. Show the court exactly what kind of person we're dealing with. Already on it, sir. We found at least 6 other families who have been targeted. The Martinez family had their car vandalized 3 times. The Johnsons received death threats in their mailbox. The Patels had their fence damaged and found racist graffiti on their garage. We're going to make sure she never hurts anyone else. Over the next several weeks, I used every connection I had built over 3 decades in the legal system. I called in favors, made recommendations, and ensured that Margaret Henderson's case received the full attention it deserved. The investigation expanded far beyond the wedding day shooting. Police discovered that Margaret had been running what amounted to a harassment campaign against minority families in Maple Grove for over 5 years. The trial began 4 months after the shooting. Emma was strong enough to testify, though she still wore a sling and her right hand shook when she was nervous. She told the court about her wedding day, about the months of harassment leading up to it, about lying on the ground in her grandmother's dress, wondering if she was going to die. David testified about watching the woman he loved get shot on what should have been the happiest day of their lives. Sarah broke down on the stand describing how it felt to hold her daughter's bleeding body. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Video evidence from multiple security cameras showed Henderson crossing property lines with a loaded weapon. Witness after witness testified about her racist comments and threats over the years. But the most damaging evidence came from Henderson's own mouth. During police questioning, she had said, "I was tired of these people thinking they could do whatever they wanted in our neighborhood. Someone had to take a stand and show them they don't belong here. These people. They don't belong here." The same racist language she had been using for years. Margaret Henderson's defense attorney tried to paint her as a concerned neighbor who had made a terrible mistake. He claimed she had been overwhelmed by stress from her recent divorce proceedings and had only meant to fire a warning shot to disperse the crowd. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ballistics report showed the gun had been aimed directly at Emma. The witnesses were clear about Henderson's intent. The pattern of harassment spoke to premeditation rather than a moment of panic. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, terroristic threatening, and hate crime enhancements that doubled the potential sentence. When the verdict was read, Margaret Henderson collapsed in her chair, wailing about how her life was ruined. Her husband Harold, who had stood by her throughout the investigation and trial, finally walked away. He filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. Margaret Henderson was sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 8 years. But the criminal trial was just the beginning of Margaret Henderson's troubles. The civil lawsuit came next. Emma and David sued for medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. Their lawyer was the best money could buy, a partner at the most prestigious firm in the state who owed me several favors from his early career. The civil case was even more devastating than the criminal trial. Without the burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the lawyer was able to present evidence of Henderson's years of harassment and the full extent of Emma's injuries. The jury awarded Emma and David $2.3 million in damages. Margaret Henderson lost her house, her savings, her retirement accounts, and her late mother's inheritance to pay the judgment. But I wasn't finished with my revenge. Using my connections throughout the legal community, I made sure that Margaret Henderson's story became known throughout the state and beyond. Legal journals wrote lengthy articles about the case. Bar associations used it as a continuing education example of how prejudice and hatred could destroy lives. Henderson's employer, a small accounting firm where she had worked for 12 years, fired her when the negative publicity became too much for their business to handle. Her professional CPA license was suspended pending ethics reviews that would likely result in permanent revocation. The Maple Grove HOA removed her as president and voted to dissolve the organization entirely rather than deal with the massive liability issues her actions had created. Margaret Henderson went from being a woman who controlled her neighborhood with an iron fist to someone who couldn't find a job or a decent place to live. She moved in with her elderly mother in a different state, but even there people knew her story. The internet never forgets, and Margaret Henderson's face was forever associated with racism, violence, and hatred. Her mugshot appeared in news articles that would follow her for the rest of her life. 8 months after the trial, I received a letter in my chambers at the courthouse. It was handwritten on cheap paper, and the return address showed it came from the women's correctional facility where Margaret Henderson was serving her sentence. Justice Williams, it began in shaky handwriting. I know you will probably throw this letter away without reading it, but I need to try to apologize. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt your daughter and destroyed her special day. I was angry and scared and I let my prejudices control my actions. I thought I was protecting my neighborhood, but I realize now that I was just protecting my own narrow-minded view of the world. I don't expect forgiveness and I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry. I have lost everything, my house, my job, my husband, my reputation, and I deserve it all. I just hope your daughter can find peace and happiness despite what I did to her. I read the letter 3 times, then locked it in my desk drawer next to other important documents. An apology couldn't give Emma back her perfect wedding day. It couldn't erase the nightmares, the physical therapy, the fear in her eyes when she heard sudden loud noises, or the limited mobility in her right arm that would last for the rest of her life. But it was acknowledgement. Margaret Henderson finally understood what her hatred had cost, not just Emma and our family, but herself and everyone who had ever cared about her. Emma and David had a beautiful second wedding ceremony exactly 1 year after the shooting. Emma insisted it be held at our house again, in the same spot where she had been shot. I won't let her take this place away from me, Dad, she said as we planned the intimate event. This is my home. This is where I belong. This is where I want to start my married life. Her shoulder had healed enough for her to wear a sleeveless dress, though she would always have limited mobility in her right arm and chronic pain on cold days. David had learned to help her with things she couldn't manage alone, and their love had only grown stronger through the trauma they had survived together. The ceremony was smaller this time, just close family and a few dear friends. But it was perfect in a way the first one never could have been. There was no fear, no anger, no hatred. Just love and healing and hope for the future. As I walked Emma down the aisle for the second time, I thought about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. Justice was Margaret Henderson sitting in prison, paying her debt to society according to law. Revenge was making sure she lost everything else too, her freedom, her reputation, her livelihood, her marriage, her home, her future. I had used my position and my connections to systematically destroy a woman who had tried to destroy my daughter. Some might say I had abused my power, that I had gone too far in my pursuit of vengeance. Others might say I had simply ensured that justice was truly served, that a dangerous racist who had terrorized innocent families finally faced real consequences for her actions. But as I watched Emma say her vows with tears of joy instead of pain, as I saw David promise to love and protect her for the rest of their lives, as I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine with happiness instead of fear, I knew I had done the right thing. Margaret Henderson had shot my daughter on her wedding day because she thought we were just another family she could intimidate and control with her position as HOA president. She had no idea I was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. She had no idea that attacking my family would bring down the full weight of the legal system on her head. She had no idea that her moment of racist violence would cost her everything she had ever cared about. But she knew now. And she would remember for the rest of her life, sitting in her prison cell, thinking about the 15 years she would spend behind bars because she couldn't tolerate the sight of a black family celebrating love in their own backyard. Emma threw her bouquet, and the flowers sailed through the air toward her college roommates. David kissed his bride, and our small group of family and friends cheered with genuine joy. The sun was setting behind our house, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful and peaceful and perfect. Margaret Henderson was in prison, and Emma was finally, truly, completely married. Justice had been served.